This is AP Lit for Monday. I have a little review I want to do with you. Those that were out today for the test on Thursday, you received a test review last Thursday, and we spent a few minutes just reviewing what's on the test. First of all, this is a copy of the PowerPoint which is posted on my Caldwell, and I went through it just to point out some of the important items that need to be studied. There are 9 characteristics of Romanticism, and you need to study those. You need to be able to list those. So there are 9 of them altogether. Here's another group of them, so there are 5 and there are 4. And then there are characteristics for neoclassicism, which came before Romanticism, and there are 4 here, and there are 2 here. So there are 6 altogether. You need to know those. Neoclassicism came before Romanticism, and realism came after Romanticism. And there are 5 characteristics of realism, all listed here. This is also on my Caldwell, and you have notes on this at home. So I want you to know those things. And then I want you to know some dates. First of all, there are 2 nations that we looked at. We looked at Britain and we looked at the United States. And the British Romantic movement is divided into 2 eras. The first era is called the Age of Romantic Triumph, and it starts with the publication of the lyrical ballads in 1798. That's the beginning of it, and it ends, this first era, it ends in 1832 with the death of Sir Walter Scott. That's called the Age of Romantic Triumph. That was sort of the peak of it. And you need to be able to, in your review of the period, you need to be able to distinguish between American and British. We're talking about the British right now, and between the poets and the novelists. The novelists are Sir Walter Scott, the creator of the historical novel, and Jane Austen, who was known for her novels of manners. In terms of the poets of this era, they're primarily the poets that I'll show you at the end, the 6 poets that we read about. And then there's a second section of the Romantic movement in England called the Early Victorian Age. And it starts with the death of Sir Walter Scott and ends with the death of Charles Dickens. So the deaths of Scott and the deaths of Dickens mark the end of the 2 eras. And you need to be able to identify some poets of this section, this Romantic section. There would be Tennyson and Robert Browning. And then novelists would be Charles Dickens and the Bronte sisters. So you need to be able to distinguish between novelists and poets of the first section and the second section, and the dates that mark those 2 sections. And now we'll move to America. This is a little easier. It's only 1 section. It's only 35 years between 1830 and 1865. 1830 marks the presidency of Andrew Jackson, who is really the first populist president. It was a Southerner, Tennessee, and his presidency marked the beginning of the common man, and there's interesting stories about that. But that was something that coincides with the beginning of the Romantic movement, which, as you know, glorifies the common man. It ends with the end of the Civil War, 1865, and there are a couple of reasons why that ended the Romantic movement. The first one is having gone through a war where 600,000 people were killed total on both sides, and people saw war and its damages, that had a huge impact on the kind of literature people wanted to read. They could no longer read books about war that idealized it or romanticized it, because they had seen what war really looks like and its carnage. And so also the development of the camera allowed them to see battlefields. Say if you're in Alabama, you can now see Gettysburg and you see the bodies of soldiers on the battlefield. And all of those things combined just had a huge impact on what people were willing to read and believe, and they were no longer willing to believe Romanticism. You also need to know that there are American poets, and the ones listed here are Poe, Whittier, Longfellow, and Bryant. Poe and Whitman is also on that list, are two that we'll read. The others probably not, but you need to recognize these names and be able to say, these are American, these are romantics, and these are poets. But there's also a list of novelists in the Romantic period, and there are four of them: Irving, Cooper, Hawthorne, and Melville. Melville was Moby Dick, Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter, and The House of Seven Gables. Cooper was the Last of the Mohicans, and Irving wrote the story of Sleepy Hollow and the Headless Horseman and so forth. So these are novelists, and these are Americans, and these are romantic. Know that transcendentalism is sort of an offshoot of Romanticism, and three words there is intuition, conscience, and self-reliance. These are characteristics of this particular philosophy, which is a philosophy, almost a religion. And then finally, as you study, there are six of these men. The first three are the older guys, and the second three are the younger guys. These are older, they lived earlier, but they also lived longer than the younger guys. The first one is William Blake. There should be about three things you know about each of these. William Blake is the social justice guy. He was also a visionary and an artist, and he's the one who was not really applauded as a great writer for a century after he died. That's William Blake. William Wordsworth is the most important one of the Romantic writers. He's the one who got it started with Coleridge with the lyrical ballads. He was known for deifying nature. Think about the world is too much with us, and the I wandered lonely as a cloud, the power of nature. And so that was the lyrical ballads and his religion of nature, and he's the most important one. And the last of the older guys is Coleridge, the best friend of Wordsworth. He with Wordsworth wrote the lyrical ballads, which is something you need to know about Wordsworth. He was also known as a literary critic, and he was known for his interest in the supernatural and the horror genre. Those are the three older guys. The next three guys all were younger, and they died younger. Byron, who wrote She Walks in Beauty and Sennacherib poem, is probably the best known of the three during his time period. He's also one of the ones who took the social justice seriously and went to the country of Greece to fight in their war of independence against the Turks, and he died there. He was also a really good friend of Shelley, and was present the night in Switzerland that Shelley, his wife, Byron, and his doctor began writing ghost stories as sort of a contest to occupy their time. And the irony about that is that Byron's and Shelley's stories are forgotten, or they never finished them. But two stories came out of that. Shelley's Frankenstein, and the doctor of Byron wrote a story called The Vampire, which was a inspiration to Bram Stoker later, who wrote Dracula. That's Lord Byron. And then finally, the last two on the list are Shelley and Keats. Shelley was the husband of Mary Shelley, wrote Frankenstein. They call him the perfect romantic. He is the one who left his wife and married Mary Shelley when she was just about 16 years old. And he also died tragically in a boating accident. And finally, Keats. He's my favorite, and also the one who died the youngest of tuberculosis. He liked to write odes, and he would have been, some people said, the next Shakespeare, but he didn't live long enough. So you need to know those 6 and just a few things about each one for the test on Thursday. Okay. We also read the poem Ozymandias, and I'm just going to quickly go over this. There are some questions that have been posted on the back of the Byron sheet, and the Shelley poem is Ozymandias right here. And some of the points that we made about the poem is, first of all, it's easy to recognize that it is a sonnet because it first has 14 lines, but you don't have to even count. You can just look at it and see the boxy type shape of it. It's short, so it's a sonnet. The questions you need to answer are, who are the narrators, who is the audience, there's some irony in the poem, and what is the meaning of the poem. So let's start with the narrator or the speaker. There are 3. There's the poet, who is the I in the poem. There's the traveler he spoke to and who spoke to him, and then there's Ozymandias himself. There are 2 audiences. There's we, the reader, but there's also the poet, or the main speaker, who the traveler tells his story to. What is the story he tells? He tells the story about the monument to Ozymandias, a king that's broken and shattered in the middle of the desert. This particular monument says this: "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, in despair." This is a very ironic statement because when he had it made, I'm sure there was a city around him and much to look at. Now there's only a desert. So the irony is the discrepancy between the words on the monument and the words on the monument and the setting surrounding the decayed monument. What kind of man or what kind of king was Ozymandias? It says in the poem that on the statue, he has a frown, a wrinkled lip, and a sneer of cold command. So it tells you a little bit about his character. And of course, the meaning of the poem, which is portrayed through the irony, is that here's a man who called himself King of Kings and was telling his audience at the time, his kingdom, how great he was. But as with all kingdoms, they fall and are replaced by, in this case, a desert. So it just shows the irony of powerful kings who think they're going to last forever, but they never do. So that's a little bit of background on Ozymandias. Please study for our test on Thursday. Particularly, also on Friday we did the October poem, which is posted, and you need to read it, and there's some directions for that. So we will see you when you get back. I'm finishing